I'm Amber Barnes. I'm delighted to be with you today. Welcome to Leading Through Uncertainty, Fear, and Scarcity. Here's a little bit about my background. I'm not going to bore you by reading the list, but I do want to share a little bit of background information behind what I'm going to be sharing with you today. The methodology comes from our core program, Dare to Lead, which is one of Brené Brown's methodologies. And I've been using her work and I've been a student of her work now for about 10 years. But I want to share how I came to it because I think that's important. What I've learned is that people generally come to Brené's work through one of three channels. One, you were a therapist or someone in sort of that mental health space, and you've been following her research for 20 plus years. Two, you saw her on mainstream media like Oprah or Inc. magazine, or heard about her work with Pixar and sort of became a fan when her work was mainstream. And then there are those of us, myself included, who sort of came to this work kicking and screaming. In 2011, a friend of mine introduced me to her work a few times, and at the mention of the words shame, vulnerability, worthiness, I cringed and said, no, thank you. It wasn't until I had sort of a face down struggle myself as a business owner that I was at Barnes & Noble. I had a mocha in my hand and was reading the back of this book cover that just spoke to me. And I was pretty disappointed to see that it was Brené Brown's book. So I took it home, I devoured it, I surrendered, and it's changed my life. And so what I'm sharing with you today comes from a deep body of 20 plus years of good empirical research, including some of the top management schools in that process, as well as several different executives from a variety of organizations. And I think we're at like over 400,000 pieces of data now. So I wanted to give you a little bit of that background. Here's what I'm hoping that you'll walk away with today. Number one, I'm hoping that you'll be able to list 3 things that are killing organizations and fostering burnout, that you'll be able to recall those. 2, I'm really hoping that you'll be able to explain why fear is not the problem and what is. I also hope that you'll be able to go back and inspect your organization to see if the pillars of brave leadership and courageous cultures are present. 4, that you're going to be able to describe the ingredients for leading through these tough times that are so full of fear and uncertainty and scarcity. And then lastly, something I'm super passionate about is that you'll walk away with some new skills so that you can start practicing courage right away and practicing being brave. So that's what we're up to today. I want to get started right out of the gate with a poll. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch this. You should be able to see this come up on your screen. Here we go. And so here's the question. Which of these issues happen in your organization? Go ahead and click all of them that apply. And right now we're at 0% of voting, so I'm going to wait until we have the majority and then I'll reveal the answers. Keep those answers coming in. Great, we're at about 60%. Keep them coming. Awesome, 72%. Wow, this is pretty exciting. I like watching this. I think it's the closest thing that I've gotten to like a sports event recently. Okay, cool. We're at 76%. So we've got majority in. I'm going to go ahead and show those results. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. 80%, cool. And then I'm going to share the results with you. And so you should be able to see, we had, the top ones with 30% of you, we avoid tough conversations, which that includes feedback. It also includes, engaging in conflict or being able to tell our truth and share hard information. There's also 30% around the risk taking, not enough sharing of bold ideas, and then about 30% for the rushing into effective or unsustainable solutions. Great. So these are the top 10 issues that came out in the research that Brene Brown and her team have conducted over the last several years across organizations. But the top 3 things that came from all organizations, number 1 was around avoiding tough conversations. Number 2 is that we spend this unreasonable amount of time on problematic behaviors, which problematic behaviors include things like outbursts, people shutting down, gossip, bullying, calling in sick when we're not really sick, covering up mistakes, etc. And then the third one that we're seeing across organizations across the globe is a lack of empathy and connection. And so according to the research, these are the top 3 things right now that are killing organizations, that are really fostering burnout. And the question that I get all the time is like, okay, that makes sense, but why? What's the big deal with these 3 things that it's killing organizations? That's a pretty big word. So go to the chat box and let's dig into this why a little bit more. But in your experience, if we're not having tough conversations, so, if we're not giving people feedback, if we're not engaging in conflict, if we're not sharing hard information in a transparent, open way, what do we do instead? Go ahead and put your ideas in the chat box, or you can come off of mute if you'd prefer to share by voice. Give everyone just a few moments to contribute. And remember, you'll need to take yourself off of mute if you want to chime in by voice. Yeah, great, Linda. A lot of avoidance. We see a ton of that. Yeah, great, Ellen. We ignore those bad behaviors and then it totally festers and builds into resentment. Rich, I see that you're off mute. What do you have?
I think you see a lot of passive aggressive activity.
Yes, totally. We're seeing a lot of that right now. Alana, great point. We're sugarcoating. We have this idea that we're going to hurt people's feelings. Yeah, great. Good. So this is why it matters. And Lou, also great point, procrastination. So these are the reasons it's killing organizations. So instead of doing these tough, honest, brave conversations, we're engaging in all these other behaviors that cause harm. They cause harm to people, and then they also harm the organization because it gets in the way of productivity, performance. It can impact our customers and our brands. So that's why that first one is killing organizations. When we avoid tough conversations, it becomes toxic for people. Raise your hand if you, and just kind of raise it visually, or you can, raise it using the participant box, but raise your hand or put, me in the chat box if your organization talks about fears and feelings, if that's normal, if it's encouraged and it actually happens. Great, I see Annie's hand up, awesome. Good, and Alana. Ooh, I want to do a happy dance that's happening in your organization. Cool, but it's not the majority. And so, the second thing around, we're spending all this time managing problematic behaviors when we don't take time to talk about fears. and to talk about feelings, and not just the fun, positive ones, but the hard ones, all that stuff gets compressed. And then it comes out by way of outbursts, bullying, aggression, passive aggressiveness, people getting sick, people psychologically checking out. And so when we don't talk about fears and feelings and make that normal, and we encourage it, and we actually make it a practice, then we're spending all this time dealing with, the output of that or the impact of that. And so that's why it's so important that we talk about fears and feelings. Otherwise, we spend this crazy amount of time and energy on all the other stuff. And then the third piece around lack of empathy and connection. So many people have this idea that, empathy and connection, those are soft and fluffy and they don't belong in the workplace. But the reality is, connection is a need that we have as human beings. Our brains are wired for connection. And when we don't feel seen and heard and valued at work, or when we're constantly met with judgment, or we're not sustaining ourselves through what we get from work, or we're feeling weak as a result of work, we're not getting our human needs met. And that creates a lack of trust between people in your organization. And it also creates a lack of trust between people and the owners of the organization or the shareholders. And so these are some of the big whys behind why these things are killing organizations, why they're fostering burnouts. So I want to do a quick pause there to see what thoughts or questions you have after hearing, what are the top 3 things killing organizations? You can chime in by the chat or by voice. Rich.
Where do you place the responsibility in leadership to try and recognize these issues and try and overcome them?
Yeah, well, I think whether we like it or not, it always starts with leadership. Leadership is often who holds the power to affect change, and people are going to model what leaders do. And so my personal opinion is that the responsibility mostly falls on the shoulders of the leaders. They're accountable. That's what it is to be a leader, is to influence and to create the culture of the organization. Other people have responsibility too, but they go first. And so that's my point of view. I'm curious about yours, Rich.
Well, when you don't see leadership stepping up to take on that role, what's the balance between kind of stepping up and to fill that void versus overstepping and not communicating with leadership about your concerns and trying to foster that through, kind of that top-down approach?
Yeah, well, I think so. This is the other thing. This is where we can see one of 2 things happen. And I've seen this in organizations where you have employees that really sort of heed that call themselves, and they give the feedback, and the leaders are open to the feedback. And so change starts to happen, or that person starts to show up and they have such influence by the way that they're showing up that organic change starts to happen. But where the risk of burnout is when employees do that and they're not heard, the feedback is not validated, there's no action taken, they're given lip service. When someone's working that hard and putting in that much emotional labor into an organization that isn't reciprocating, those employees then are at severe risk of burnout. And, either one, they check out psychologically, which is so dangerous, or they check out physically and they leave. So I do think it's a both and, but leaders go first. That's the call of leadership. Yeah, Alana, great point. Is that we really need to not be afraid of change, or I would reframe it. It's okay to be afraid of change, but do it anyway. We heard Linda say that earlier. Feel the fear and do it anyway. All right, let's go to the second piece, which is this idea of what gets in the way. What is keeping us from addressing those top 3 issues or the top 10 issues? This is an important question. And as Brene and her team and myself and other practitioners have asked this question, people always want to say that it's fear. that it's because we're afraid. And that's just not the case. It's this thing called armor. So if we think about what it is to be human, our brains are wired to keep us safe, which means that our brains are constantly scanning our environment for threats. So fear is a function of being human. It's not the fear that's the problem, it's how we react to the fear. And that's where armor comes into play. And so armor, it's all the things that we do and say and think and feel as human beings to try to keep ourselves safe. It's all the ways that we try to protect our ego. It's all the ways that we try not to feel some of those hard emotions. It's all the ways that we try to avoid vulnerability. And so it's not fear that's getting in the way, but our reaction to fear that's creating the problems in organizations and outside of organizations. So I want to do another poll. And this poll, these are some of the most common forms of armor that we see in organizations. And so go ahead and select the ones that you're seeing in your organization. Here we go. You can check all that apply. And I'll wait until we have almost majority. You should see that poll up on your screen now. We've got one person in, 2 people, 3, 4, 5, awesome. Keep them coming. %, keep it going. I'll stop the poll once we get over 75%. We're at 58%. Keep them coming. Give another minute or so. 66%. We just need a couple more people. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. And so these are just some of the forms of armor. There are more, but if you take a look at this list, check this out. 39% of you said that honest and kind are thought of as mutually exclusive, meaning that we think, or people around us think, that to be honest, that means I can't be kind, which, you know, that's a myth. There's a way to do them both together. We excuse bad behavior if performance is solid. I have a background in retail banking. I won't tell you where, but I was in that culture for 7 years and it blew my mind and it was so toxic. Yeah, exhaustion rewarded as a status symbol, super common. So these are just some of the things that we engage in organizations, employees, and leaders to try to keep ourselves safe or to try to avoid vulnerability, which vulnerability is defined as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. We do all these things because we don't like that feeling, or we want to try to control the outcomes. And so I just want to pause quickly before I go to the pillars of leadership and see what thoughts or questions you have so far. Now that we've talked about what's getting in the way, you can use the chat or come off of mute. All right. Yeah, Rich.
What do you think is the best way to kind of overcome these issues? Is it in small groups? Is it in kind of a big, hey, let's go on this retreat and kind of all, do the kumbaya thing? How do you find it most effective to deal with these issues within an organization?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I don't ever think it's about coming together in a kumbaya sort of way. I think that's myth. I think this work is hard, it's uncomfortable, and it it's exhausting. And so that's never ever the goal. The goal is to get real and to do hard work together. And I think depending on how severe some of these issues are, that sort of dictates if it's better served to happen in small groups, like maybe with the executive leadership team first, and then kind of working your way through the layers. Or in some cases, it's great to do it all at once. And the culture is such that that's possible. I've worked in both types of organizations where if we did everyone at once, it would have backfired because trust was so low and the culture was pretty toxic and the faith and credibility of leadership was not very good. So we had to take a different strategy in that case. So it sort of depends on where we're starting from. But really considering the context, the history, where are we, it can either be small group or large group. Does that answer your question, Rich?
Yes, thank you.
You bet. What other thoughts do you have so far? All right, we've talked about the 3 things killing organizations. We know now what gets in the way. It's not fear, it's armor. Let's move on to the pillars of brave leadership. And so here's what they are. And this comes again directly from the research that if we want to have brave leadership and courageous cultures, the first thing is we have to embrace the suck. I can't tell you how many people I run into that have this belief that life should be cozy and comfortable and we should avoid pain. It's sort of this new idea around toxic positivity that we want just the good. And the problem with that is that doesn't align with what it is to be human. Pain is part of life. Suffering is optional, but we've got to embrace the suck. There are hard things about being human, hard things that we go through, cue pandemic. We need to embrace the suck and stop trying to push away things that are unpleasant, uncomfortable, or hard because we've bought into this myth that it should be easy and comfortable and cozy all the time. And so this mantra actually comes from the military, which is embrace the suck. Vulnerability doesn't feel good. It never will. And so we need to accept that. Number 2, who we are is how we lead. Let me give you an example of this. One of my clients who is a leader in an organization has a peer, a fellow manager who has on their whiteboard, no feelings at work. Well, let me just ask you, if this is this person's belief, what do you think it's like to work for them or work with them? How do you think they lead? Go ahead and chime in by voice or put it in the chat box. If we have a no feelings at work, how do you think that affects how we lead? Yeah, awful environment, 100%. It sends this message that it's not okay to be human. You can't be your authentic self here. I don't want to hear it. Yeah, terrible approach. It fosters a ton of negativity. And, talk about problematic behaviors. When we have a no feelings policy, I guarantee you there's a ton of passive aggressiveness in that organization. There's a ton of gossip. There's a ton of back channeling, which that's the meeting after the meeting. Guaranteed there's a dirty yes happening where I'm saying yes and behind your back, I'm like, hell no. Yeah, so we want to be mindful that as leaders, actually, even as employees, we need to do our own work to challenge our beliefs to challenge the biases, to challenge the misinformation that we've gained over the years, because all of that informs how we lead. And then Rich, I see your comment here. Sounds like a great idea in practice, but doesn't foster cooperation. I want to double check. Are you saying that when we say no feelings, that doesn't foster cooperation?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, for sure. So the thing we have to remember is that who we are matters. I watch this all the time where people are like, hey, can you come in and teach my leaders how to do X, Y, Z? And the reality is, if we don't address all the stuff that's getting in the way, like beliefs and these ideas that we have about human beings or experiences that we've had in the workplace early on, if we don't address the wiring, sort of our blueprints, no amount of how-tos will solve anything. And I think that's why we have access to more information now than we ever have as a human cohort. And we still have problems. It's not a lack of how-to. It's not a lack of not knowing. It's that we're not addressing all the crap that's inside that gets in the way. So we've got to work on sort of who we are to then address the how-tos. And this is really about self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
How do you balance, there's been this push, everyone gets a participation trophy, let's make everyone feel good. There's a balance, of tension between being productive and coddling. So how do you kind of bridge that gap to be effective?
Well, I think there's a difference between making sure that people feel seen and heard and valued and coddling, or buying into this idea that everyone gets a trophy. Those are two very different things. One sort of falls on the end of the spectrum around like people pleasing and creating this, toxic positive culture that's not real. So I think when people feel seen and heard and valued, it's about really listening to what they need to be successful. It's about really listening in the interview process to make sure that we're hiring the right people instead of rushing, which is what I see happen all the time. We're in so much pain, we need cheeks and seats, so we make bad hiring decisions, or we hear what we want, or we hire because they're cool and we want to go grab a beer with them after, instead of, is this the right person for the job and for our culture? So when we take time to really see and hear and value people, then what we see in the research anyway is there's an increase in productivity, there's an increase in accountability, and it's not all like woo-hoo, like positive all the time, because that's not human, but it's real and it's authentic and people feel safe. So Rich, does that answer the question?
Yes, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Cool, you bet. Thanks for asking. The last one, which I feel a little nervous about using this word contagious, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but this is a good thing that we want to spread, which is courage. What we know from the research, and this goes back to the question about whose responsibility is this, employees or leaders, regardless of who's showing up with more courage, it's contagious. When people start experiencing people taking more smart risks, practicing vulnerability, really taking time to make sure that people feel seen and heard and valued, that we're not judging, that we're really focused on creating meaning and accountability, that starts to spread. And that's what we want. And so it kind of goes back to this age-old idea that we need to be the change. When you want your organization to have brave leadership or to have a courageous culture, it's not about being on a pedestal, telling people to be braver, be more courageous. Be that change, show up and be different. And then that starts this ripple effect. And so let me pause there and see what questions there are around the 3 pillars that you can look for in your organization. Yeah, Tori, great points. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Thank you for that. It's been a big learning for me in the last decade. All right, it looks like no questions at this point. So let's go on to the ingredients. If you want to create a brave culture, if you want to have brave leadership, and you want to do a better job of leading through uncertainty and fear and the scarcity, which, the pandemic, I think, brought all of this to the surface. The reality is this stuff happens all the time, regardless of if there's a pandemic or not. These are just normal human challenges. So these ingredients will serve you even after the pandemic is over, which is hopefully soon. But here they are. These are the 5 things that if you can put these in your pocket and really practice on making sure that these ingredients are in the mix of employee development, of leadership development, you're including it in onboarding, you're including these things in how you reward people, how you recognize people, how you promote people, I guarantee that you'll start to see a shift in your culture where you'll lean more towards less armor and more courage. There will be more empathy and connection. People will be more willing to have those tough conversations, and we'll be spending a lot less time managing unproductive behavior. And so let's dig into these in a little bit more depth. Here's the first one. I like to call this the ABCs of self-awareness. If we really want to start to make a difference, a fundamental skill that we can master is learning how to differentiate emotion from our behavior, from our thinking. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you were to ask me, hey, Amber, how are you feeling right now? I might say something like, I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling a little anxious, there's some nervous energy here. If you were to ask me about my behaviors, what I'm doing right now is getting excited. And what I want to be doing actually is doing this work all the time because it means so much to me. And the thoughts that I'm having are, this work is long overdue. I think we've been pushing this kind of stuff to the side for far too long. And understanding what makes us human is really going to be a difference maker in work going forward. When I can accurately name my feelings, when I can actually differentiate that from thoughts and then also behaviors, I can start to use language that says, hey, I'm feeling this way. And I can start to become more aware of how my feelings affect my behavior, or I can start to become more aware of thoughts and how that affects my behavior, which thoughts include biases, judgments, beliefs, assumptions, fears even. All that stuff goes into the thinking bucket. And so this is really where self-awareness starts. So let's do a test. Go ahead and open up your chat box. What's one word to describe how you're feeling right now? Which again, feelings are emotions. The 3 most common ones are mad, sad, glad, happy, angry, sad. Good, placid. What an interesting word. Calm, excited, blessed, happy, challenged. Okay, good. These are all great feeling words. Cool. So now let's go to thoughts. What are some thoughts that you're having right now? Which, Lou, you gave us one already. Your ingredients are great. That's a thought. That's a thought. That's so lovely. What other thoughts are you having right now? Which, I'll give you a thought is, I'm hungry. It's a thought that I'm having right now. I'll tell you another thought that I have is that some of you might be multitasking right now. I don't know if it's true, but it's a thought that I'm having. No judgment about it. So what are some thoughts that you're having right now? Yeah, good, Rachel. I know who could use this. Yeah, Joy, great. This new project will be too much. Okay, good. Awesome. So I won't ask you to, talk about your behavior right now, but this is where self-awareness starts, differentiating emotion from thoughts, from behavior, which, by the way, if you can do this for yourself, it's going to set you up to do this much better with other people. And also, it's going to set you up for great communication skills, like giving feedback or engaging in conflict effectively. So this is a really good foundational skill. So the next ingredient is other awareness. And with this one, it's about curiosity. Can I get curious about the emotions that I might be seeing in other people? Can I get curious about other people's thoughts? Can I get curious about other people's behaviors? So I'm going to pick on Dave because he's the first one that I see right now. And so, Dave, I see that you're smiling. Tell me more about what's happening for you. I'm putting you on the spot. And you're on
There we
mute.
go. I'm off mute. Well, we talked earlier, this is your third time, so clearly I love what you have to say. And I'm just fascinated by all the insights you have.
Thank you. Cool. Well, so that's me getting curious. Instead of making up a story about what that smile means or doesn't mean, I'm asking. The same thing can happen with emotion. So if I'm in a meeting with someone and I see them push back from the table or they slam something down, instead of reacting, which is what most people do, and armoring up, I can say, hey, I'm noticing this. Tell me, I'm telling myself that you're angry about something. Tell me what's happening for you. I can get curious. And then same thing with thinking. I can check in and say, hey, tell me what's happening for you. I'm noticing that your brows are furrowed. What are you thinking over there? This is the second skill. So first skill, first ingredient, self-awareness. Second skill, second ingredient, other awareness. What thoughts or questions do you have about that? Yeah, Rich, great question. So as we shift towards more remote workforce, how do you see us using these methods? Rich, I want to clarify, when you say methods, do you mean these two skills that we're talking about, or sort of an overarching everything we're talking about?
Everything we're talking about, right? Because that's what it is. We're talking about interacting with each other, and we're talking about being able to recognize and find a means of communicating with each other on that very base human level, right? Within a work environment that allows us to, be the best we can be, right? So as we shift towards this Zoom, Teams environment, which is less interfacing, how do we still connect?
Yeah. So I want to challenge the belief that remote work means less interfacing. And so I had an opportunity to work for a Fortune 50 organization for 7 years before starting my business. I also worked for a global organization. So we've been working remotely for a very long time. We've been facilitating virtually for a very long time and having to communicate using these channels for a while. So what I know is, for example, like with Zoom, we ask everyone, turn your videos on. I want to see your face, because that's part of connection. Is I want to be able to see what's happening with your facial expressions. So I can see, what's happening. That's how we connect as human beings, is with those mirror neurons in our brain. So part one is mandating video is part of that, because we don't get to show up to a meeting in person like this or with a bag on our head. We don't do that in person. So the first part is sort of creating these ground rules for engagement. The second is we use apps and resources like Marco Polo is one of the best apps out there, because if I need to talk with an employee or someone, I can record a video and send it to them so they can hear my tone of voice, they can see my face, they can get more context, but we can still communicate in a way that works for both of us and our schedules. So using technology, I think, in a smarter way, and challenging some of the myths and assumptions that we have about working remotely. There are ways to do it where we can stay very connected. I led a global team when I had people from, all around the world on my team. And I feel confident saying that we were very connected and people felt very close. We never, ever got to get together in person, not once. So all we had was remote work, and we knew each other really well and felt really supported. So there's a way to do it.
Well, just to be honest, I have my video off because I am multitasking, and I don't want to appear rude. But I have worked in organizations where, we were all kind of clustered in the same building, and yet there was a lack of communication. And, so it's not like this new kind of work environment has changed things, right? There's always been a lack of communication within a lot of organizations. It's just kind of human nature. So I'm just curious as to what I agree. I think remote workforce actually can be very effective, and it can foster even better communication because it forces us to communicate on that level even greater. It's easy to walk by somebody's office day after day, because I don't like that person and I don't want to talk to them, right? So
Yeah,
I think there will be a lot of positive change that comes out of this. But I think leadership again is really going to be the driver to make things happen in a positive way.
agreed. Agreed. My personal perspective is remote work sort of became the latest excuse that we use. We can't do that because we're remote. And I think it really comes from a place of we don't understand what's getting in the way, because we didn't understand what was getting in the way when we worked in the same building. And so for me, what I've seen is it still boils down to we have all this armor that gets in the way. And so, Gabby, your point about getting curious, also getting curious about what's keeping us from feeling connected. And it's not remote work. There are lots of ways to work around that. So how do we nip that in the bud and get to the heart of the issue, which is we might have to be more vulnerable with each other. We might have to make different agreements. We might need to say, you know what, it's okay to be on Zoom with your ball cap and wear your pajama bottoms, or, no pants if you prefer, but you got to show up. We want to see your face. Those are going to be our rules of engagement together. But yeah, Tori, great point. What I'm seeing with a lot of teams now is now having the courage to set boundaries, which requires courage and vulnerability. We have to also set boundaries about what's okay so that we're not overworking ourselves and on all the time, which also leads to burnout. As human beings, we need rest. We need white space. We need fuel in the forms of sleep and play and rest and all that stuff. So we have to set boundaries, which, a lot of people I know, myself included, are not so great at that. We say yes when we mean no a lot. So that's another skill that we can add. So first two ingredients, self-awareness, other awareness. Here's the third. And this goes to embrace the suck. Vulnerability is a full contact emotion. Brene Brown talks about watching, senior level executives tap out of hard conversations because they can't manage the physiology of vulnerability. It's a full contact emotion that has a lot of us feeling like we're coming out of our skin. So the third skill is we need to work on our relationship with vulnerability. And that means understanding the myths that we have about vulnerability, the way that drives our behavior. And this is connected to the who we are as how we lead. We also need to understand how it shows up for other people so we can get curious about stuff when we see it, rather than getting defensive and armoring up. So here's your question. How do you know when you're feeling vulnerable? Like, what are your tells? What happens in your body? What happens in your mind? What are some of your go-to behaviors? Either chime in by voice or put it in the chat box. Great, Joy, thank you. Yeah, quick to react, so we can notice that. Good, Ellen. You notice that there's tension and that you get irritable. Fabulous. This is great self-awareness. Lou, awesome. You noticed aggressiveness. Okay, good, good. So, and then, yeah, great, Ashley, nervous. You can feel embarrassed or you notice fear. Good. So the thing that we want to do with vulnerability is, this actually comes from Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about the last of the human freedoms being that there's these stimuli that happen, or a stimulus that happens, and then there's our reaction. Well, our freedom lies in our ability to create space between what happens and how we respond. And so with vulnerability, if we can learn what our tells are in our body before we actually behave, before we actually say things, then we can start to create this space so that we're more at choice about what we do and say when we feel vulnerability. Yeah, Jamie, great points. It's this idea of thinking before we speak. But I think there's more to it. It's not just thinking, because we get stuck in our heads sometimes. It's about taking space. So sometimes it's stop thinking and breathe, get back into your body, get back into your prefrontal cortex. We want to create space so that we can respond. Feel, think, speak. Awesome. I love that, Ashley. Cool. So first ingredient, self-awareness. Second ingredient, other awareness, which those are the two foundational skills of emotional intelligence. Third skill, we've got to build our capacity with vulnerability. Here's the fourth skill. It's empathy. I want to bust a myth right now. People think that just because we're naturally empathic, meaning I can sense the emotions of other people, I can feel them, I may even take them on, that means that we're good at the skill of empathy. That's crap. The skill of empathy actually takes practice. And so whether or not you're naturally empathic, the skill of empathy is accessible to everyone. And here's what the attributes are. This actually comes from a nursing scholar out of Wellesley, Teresa Wiseman. This is her research on what goes into good empathy. Here are the steps. Can I take the other person's perspective? Not what's my perspective about the situation, but what's their perspective? What is this like for them? Number two, which I think is the hardest for so many people, is stay out of judgment. We're not asking you to give it a value, if we should or shouldn't have done it, if it's good or bad, right or wrong. We're not asking for judgment. Just hear it for what it is. And then the third is listen for emotion. Can I pick it up when I hear it? Can I pick it up when I see certain body language? Or if I hear, a shift in someone's voice? And then fourth, can I communicate that emotion and say something like, hey, I'm really picking up nervousness right now. Is that happening for you? Or I'm really sensing that you're angry about this. Or I'm hearing you. This sounds like it's really been humiliating for you to go through this. And then I practice mindfulness, which means I don't take it on. I don't over-identify with it. I just notice it. I let myself connect with it. And then we move on. Notice what's not here. Fixing it, giving advice, solving the problem. None of that stuff leaves people feeling seen and heard and valued. So practicing empathy is your starting point. Once you've done that, then you can ask the question, what else would be helpful for you? Or you can ask the question, would sharing my perspective be helpful for you? Or would you like some advice? But your starting point is empathy. Let me pause there and see if this brought up any questions or thoughts for you.
I think anyone that's been in an emotional relationship has dealt with these topics. And I guess the thing is how do you balance that emotional side in a work environment, right? There's a level of emotion that needs to be interchanged, right? But it still is a work environment. So how do you balance that.
I'm curious, when I hear you say it's still a work environment, tell me what's underneath that for you. Like,
Well,
I feel sense there's a belief there.
there's obviously a connection that you make with people that you work with, right? But there's also a, it stops at some point, right? With that emotional connection, right? Because they are just coworkers, right?
I'm not sure. So when you say they're just coworkers, I think I want to clarify. So one thing is we're not therapists. So we don't want to cross the line into, our role becoming helping people process their emotions all the time. That's
Agreed.
yeah. So we're not advocating for that. And that's part of boundaries, knowing what's okay and not okay. But I would say part of seeing and hearing and valuing people is being able to say, wow, I can really see that you're having a hard day today. Tell me what's going on. Having some boundaries around that. And there's some training that goes into that, learning how to share appropriately, learning when we need to say, hey, it sounds like a referral to our employer assistance programming would be helpful. That's all part of boundary work. But I think it's dangerous to say that we need boundaries around this, but emotions should be welcome at work because we hire human beings and we're emotional beings. Even the folks, that want to say, I'm a thinker, I'm not emotional, come talk to me. We'll work on that. But does that help, Rich? We want boundaries.
Right, exactly. And I guess that's kind of what I'm asking is what are those boundaries? How do we define those boundaries? The boundaries will be different, right? I think for, supervisor versus an employee versus peers, so that's all, what are those boundaries, and how lucid are they within the fluidity of that exchange?
Yeah. So I think that's going to be a bigger conversation than what we have time for. But what I'll say is boundaries happen through a conversation about, let's talk about what you need and what I need to feel safe and seen and heard here at work. Let's get it out there on the table. And then let's make some agreements about what's okay and not okay. And then let's agree to be accountable to those agreements. That's really where it starts. It's a process that we guide clients through called container building. And that's where it starts. So it starts by being curious, expressing our needs, aligning on that, making those agreements, and then being accountable to those agreements.
Great, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for the question. All right, so first ingredient, self-awareness. Second ingredient, other awareness. Third agreements, manage your capacity for vulnerability. Fourth ingredient, empathy. Which, remember, it's not about, relating to the experience, it's relating to the emotion. So, if someone has this experience, it's not about, oh, I've been through that too. It's, oh, I've felt that too. Connect to the emotion, not the experience. That's a big one. But the last ingredient is self-compassion. And somebody asked earlier, how do we balance sort of this need for like a positive working environment where people feel seen and heard and valued, and accountability and results? Self-compassion, the research around this actually shows that when we do a good job with this, we're more compassionate with people, and that creates more space for accountability and responsibility. So it creates more, not less. And that happens because, one, we acknowledge that what we experience, all of us, is what we all experience in terms of emotions, things like failures, disappointments, making mistakes, etc. When we learn to speak to ourselves like someone we love, self-kindness instead of so harsh and critical, it actually increases our ability to take ownership. And then the last one, can we acknowledge feelings and experiences and move through it rather than getting stuck and consumed by it, or pushing it away? These are the self-compassion skills that come from Kristen Neff. And this is the fifth ingredient. And then just the reminder that compassion, again, leads to more responsibility, more accountability, not less. And so here's what we've been through during our time today. I'm really hoping that you can recall what those three things are killing organizations. We're not having tough conversations. We're spending a lot of time managing problematic behavior, and there's a lack of empathy and connection. That we now know that it's not fear, it's armor that gets in the way. We know now that those three pillars that we need to look for are embracing the suck, not pretending that we have to be happy, happy, joy, joy all the time. Or two, that who we are is how we lead. We can't do this whole fake it till you make it thing. That doesn't work. And number three, courage is contagious. That we have these 5 ingredients that we can look for, and that those 5 ingredients are actually skills that help us practice courage and be brave. And so I hope that you're walking away with those things. I'd like to check in to see what thoughts or questions you have before I share some resources. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Gabby. Don't leave yet. I have one more thing to share with you. Cool. And thank you, Ashley. Ashley called out that emotions should be part of work because we hire human beings. Yes, 100%. So here's the thing. Apply what you've learned, take it and do something with this, maximize your return on this hour of time and energy. I invite you to do a deeper dive with Dare to Lead. NCET members actually save on their registration for that program. I'm going to put all this in the chat. And then if you want to schedule a discovery session to talk more, I put the link in the chat box. So you have the link to our Dare to Lead program, the code for NCET members, and then also a link if you would like to talk offline. I'll be here for a few moments, but thank you so much for letting me share this with you. It's really near and dear to my heart, and I hope that you're walking away with some helpful tools. Oh, I love that, Annie. Thank you. Feeling braver. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, Stefan, I am teaching a leadership course through higher education. I think it started already, but you can reach out to UNR Extended Studies. I'm on the faculty for that. And then I'm on deck to also do their social entrepreneurship program here soon at UNR.
What is the social entrepreneurship course about?
Yeah, so the social entrepreneurship class explores the idea of having either a nonprofit or a for-profit and what it means to have a social purpose, to have an organization that benefits society, and what some of the practices are that goes into being a social entrepreneur, how to design your organization, how it's different from traditional business, and really why someone would want to do that and how they can do it either as a for-profit or nonprofit. Yeah. So we really dig into the mechanics of that.
Obviously, I have a soft spot in my heart for nonprofits.
Yeah, me too. It's one of the programs that I'm part of is the Algerian Youth Leadership Program through UNR and the Northern Nevada International Center. And we're working with these amazing high school students from Algeria, helping them build social enterprises and getting this real life experience with being social entrepreneurs. And it's been really fun. They're using human-centered design, and it's been cool to see their minds open up about, I can have a for-profit that has a social purpose, not just an NGO.
How are the benefit corporations doing here in Nevada?
Well, there's 2 flavors. So we have B Corps, which, my personal opinion is doesn't really matter much. It's like a line in your bylaw. We only have a handful of B Lab certified organizations. Those ones I think are really flourishing, but we only have a handful. We're really behind, which, I'd love to see that shift, but it's a long process. I do think we have a lot of organizations that are behaving like a B Lab certified company, but might not have the certification,
right?
Myself included. Well, I think even business schools are still teaching that the point of business is profit, which is, that's one path. It's not the path.
Right.
And so, I think until we shift how entrepreneurs and leaders are being educated, we're going to keep seeing that fall off the radar. So I think we have to change the dialogue and change the training so that more people know what the path is and how to do it differently.
Well, Amber, thank you so much. This is another excellent presentation. And it's always good to see you because obviously haven't seen you in person for a very long time.
I know, likewise. This really filled my cup today. So thank you for having me. And it was really good to see you and to see other faces that I haven't seen in a while.